Godpal Rosie recommended I try beating the game with items only from the Asylum, and at first I thought that would be a pretty boring run. I could just head back to the Asylum ASAP, grab a Black Knight sword, dupe some Twinkling Titanite from Snuggly, and be on my merry way. Instead though, I want to do this run with a couple stipulations to make it more interesting. The rules will also apply to consumables and ammo, but if I don't directly use the consumable, I can get it from anywhere. For instance, I can get a purple moss clump from an int drop and bring it back to trade. I also don't want to dupe anything. No souls, no upgrade materials, nothing. Hopefully that makes this run at least a little more interesting. The most important decision we make is our starting class, since that defines what the start of the run will be, and everything else isn't really a choice. There are really only two good options here. Either the Thief or the Bandit's Knife, which is the only weapon in the entire game we'll be able to use that has bleed, or the Sorcerer, so we can start with the Catalyst and use Pursuers later on. I would have also said the Hunter for the bow to kill Ingward, but that would be the only use for it. Having bleed would make a few bosses vastly easier and faster, especially at the beginning of the run. I would say we could get to Sif early on for a big boost in souls, but the Crest of Artorias isn't an option since it's not in the Asylum. I'm going to allow for a couple of exceptions, like the Asylum F2 East Key, as well as a couple rings like the Covenant of Artorias and the Orange Charred Ring. Anyway, I think it'll be better to start as a sorcerer, since it will make the later game areas much easier, and killing the stray demon with a +0 dagger is slow, but not hard by any means. Anyway, we make our character, run through the Asylum normally for now, grabbing our dagger, small leather shield, and catalyst. We only have so much gear available to us for this entire run, but most of it isn't really worth making use of. Obviously there's the straight sword hilt, or the broken straight sword from the hollows, as well as the long sword from the one hollow near the locked east door. West door? I don't remember. And the spear when we return, but none of that is really worth using. The hollow soldier armor is technically better than the sorcerer set, but that's not really saying much. I'm not used to using magic in this game at all, so the Asylum demon hits me more than I anticipated, but it's not like it's hard to get out of the Asylum. Our first order of business after leaving the Asylum is returning to the Asylum. I wanted to return to the Asylum immediately to get the Black Knight Sword, our main melee weapon for the run, but I really underestimated the stats we'd need for it. You can get back to the Asylum immediately by jumping onto the ledge around the roof of Petrus's building, then jumping up the ledge in a weird, janky way. I made sure to grab the key here too, since it'll give us access to the only ring that isn't required that we'll be able to use. I suppose the orange charred ring isn't strictly necessary, but I didn't want to kill a ton of enemies just to get 30 humanity since I can't dupe, and you can only get 2 humanity from the Asylum. If you don't know, there's a mechanic called humanity drop that lets you get humanity just by killing certain enemies, but I really didn't want to do the grinding. The Duke's Archive just after you exit the prison does have a bugged humanity drop, but here we are. Anyway, we get the ring, kill the Black Knight over and over until it dropped its sword, and leave the Asylum again. Using the souls I got from the Black Knights, Oscar, and the Asylum Demon, I was able to get my dexterity to 18 and my strength to 11, but unfortunately that's nowhere close to what we'll need to actually use it. And frankly, I don't feel like grinding out a bunch of levels in strength, so instead we have a couple goals to do first. I need to get a purple moss clump, a blooming purple moss clump, and a blood red moss clump, since we can trade the 2 normal moss clumps for a single twinkling titanite each, and the blooming for 2. We can easily get to Andre through the valley, then grind those out. From there, we can actually use the elevator to get back into the Asylum again, grab the titanite, and do what was easily my worst choice in this entire run. I decided to kill the stray demon with a +0 dagger instead of just grinding out a couple levels first. It would have been vastly easier if I had just done that, but now I have to stab the thing for nearly 20 minutes. That took longer than punching the Asylum demon to death. That's absurd. Anyway, after that extremely tedious fight, we can pump our stats to the levels necessary to use the sword and put everything else into intelligence. I want to get to 32 as soon as possible. I had just enough souls to get the sword to +1, then killing the Titanite demon gave me enough to get to +2. The gargoyles are incredibly easy, even if I completely forgot that the strong attack from the Black Knight sword is one of, if not the worst attack in the game. The jumping attack is good, but the standing strong attack is awful. Do not use it, it's way too slow. The 10,000 souls from the gargoyles are obviously more than enough to get to +3, and we now have the strongest weapon we'll have for the entire rest of the run. I also want to point out that I didn't grab the Firekeeper soul because we can't use it. It's not from the Asylum. We're stuck with a +0 Estus Flask for the whole game. Granted, that's not that bad. I've beaten the game without healing, but it is a little annoying. Next up is Quelaag, since I have no reason to kill the Capra Demon yet. It's not like I can use the Large Ember. I'll come back and do all bosses soon, I just want to wait until I'm a little bit less squishy. Running down through Blighttown is easy, as usual, and Quelaag takes a ton of damage from this weapon, significantly more than pretty much every run I've done recently, barring the max AR weapon, but I feel like that one is obvious. Plus, the sword isn't unbearably slow, just annoyingly slow. I also take out Ceaseless right now for that boost in souls. Getting to as high a level as possible as soon as possible is very important for what I'm about to do. I use the one and only Homeward Bone available in this entire run, from killing the Stray Demon, to warp all the way back up to Firelink Shrine, and run back up to the Parish to get to Sense. Sense is easy, sprinting through is not hard at all at this point. I've done this area too many times to think about it. I did die to the Firebomb throwing giant, but I rested at the bonfire, so it's not like I lost much time to that or whatever. And time isn't exactly of the essence for this run. I killed the Iron Golem in 3 hits, which I was certainly not expecting. 2 hits staggered it, then 1 more knocked it off the edge. I know staggering is based on damage, not poise, but 2 hits from a +3? A +3 that does less damage than weapons I've used on this boss before that needed way more hits? I don't understand this boss at all, apparently. It might have to do with object damage, or a combination of poise and damage somehow. There's no way it's just pure damage. I only did 440 to get it to stagger. Well, whatever, I guess it just makes it easier to move on. Anor Londo goes completely normally until I reached the elevator. I brought it down and both gargoyles attacked me, rather than just the second one. I suppose this might be the first time I pushed the elevator down without quitting out after running past the first gargoyle. I might just fall from the rafters and quit out to avoid dying every single time I skip the gargoyle. Anyway, I kill both my second time through, kill the archer in 1 riposte, and get to the bonfire. The sword is slow enough that Ornstein and Smough cause a bit of an issue, since I can barely get a moment on my own, but I fought them enough that the speed of my weapon isn't a detrimental issue. I didn't even take the hit from Super Smough, so I guess it might have just been seeing my openings incorrectly. I don't usually need to be this careful. I still somehow did the fight my first try. I guess I'm just good at the game or something. Now that we have the Lord Vessel, I can enact the plan I've had from the beginning. Well, all of this was part of the plan. The order of the bosses and stuff was relatively meticulous, but we can reach the result of my plan. First things first, I head down to the Darkroot Basin and take out the Hydra. The final head luckily isn't an issue since I have soul arrows, and I can still take out the other 6 with a single hit. The Golden Golem is no issue, especially since we have the Dark Wood Grain Ring, which lets us walk around in the water at a normal speed. I decided fighting the 4 kings at this exact second wasn't worth it, so I just dropped past Frempt and placed the Lord Vessel before grabbing the Broken Pendant and entering the DLC. To my recollection, this is the earliest I've ever entered the DLC, but at this point I've done the fights enough that it shouldn't be too ridiculously difficult. The Sanctuary Guardian is always pretty easy, especially with how much damage you're doing. It's not an insane amount, but it is a normal amount, uncharacteristic of a challenge run. It's not like I had to do the fight hitless either, so it was easy enough. Artorias is kind of the same story. I've done the fight so many times that I just know when is and isn't a safe time to attack. There were a couple times I slipped up, obviously, but that didn't really matter since hitless isn't really my goal. We can even knock him out of buffing with a couple R1s. The Black Knight Sword is pretty slow, so you probably shouldn't even be using a jumping attack in this fight, but it's still fast enough that most attacks can be punished safely. I don't quite want to fight Calamite yet, but I'll grab the Crest Key for later. My main goal is to fight Manus. The Mimic doesn't die instantly, but they're really slow, so they're not particularly threatening. The area just in front of the building that the prisoner is in is probably the hardest part of the entire DLC that isn't a boss fight, at least at low health levels. The sorcerers can kill you extremely quickly, and 3 bloatheads attacking you immediately are really annoying to deal with. Luckily, the sorcerers don't have much health, so it isn't the worst, but it's still very annoying. You can easily just run past the prisoner itself and quit to drop aggro before bringing up the elevator. The Ulasil Dungeon bonfire is usually the only bonfire in the entire game that I kindle, just because I'm not confident fighting Manus, but I figured if I was going to fight him at such a low level, I should commit and learn the fight as well as I could. I don't think I ever died because I ran out of healing though. All of my deaths were to attacks that would kill me in 1 hit or hubris from just not healing. The Ring of Orbs will kill instantly at this health level and is nearly impossible to avoid sometimes, like when he jumps away twice and immediately uses it. All 3 dark magic attacks are very dangerous though, not just the ring. I did get decent at dodging the shotgun through all this, but otherwise I didn't learn much about Manus through this ordeal. I know how to read his tells much better, as well as got a feel for most of his attacks, dodge timings, openings, when I should try to attack, all that, but he's still my least favorite boss in the game by far. He has a lot of attacks that may or may not be followed up, especially a staff slam to hand slam to staff slam combo that can repeat indefinitely until he decides to do something else. I've had him cross the entire arena with it, it's so frustrating. He also just doesn't roar after using dark attacks sometimes, and I have no idea why. My biggest piece of advice for this fight, with this build, at this level and all, is to play passive. Wait for very safe openings, the giant arm swings, the fast jump, the slam, getting up close during the ring attack, stuff like that. Using jump attacks is probably your best bet. It's the highest damage you can safely do. It comes out much faster than the strong attack and only does a little less damage. 99.9% of the time after those attacks, he'll jump away if you're close enough. Sometimes he just doesn't, and I could not tell you why, but most of the time he should, meaning they're the closest you're going to get to a safe attack opportunity on this fight. After the combo is not a safe time to attack, by the way. I learned that the hard way. His combo has no end lag at all, and I've had him do another combo after the one time I tried to attack him, and instantly died. I understand why people like this fight, I really do, but I just really, really do not. Now we can take Manus' soul back to the Asylum, give it to Snuggly, and get our only other spell, Pursuers. Now it's time to go through and wipe out every boss methodically. The Taurus Demon is extremely easy to reach and has the least health, so I'd say that's a good target. Pursuers didn't do nearly as much damage as I expected to a hollow with a broken shield, but I suppose it did still die in a single hit. The Burg as a whole is incredibly easy after going through the DLC, being the first area in the game compared to the hardest by far, especially with in-game gear. I mean, the sword is still only at +3, but I did beat Manus with it, so it's effectively in-game gear. The Black Knight even dies to a single parry. I made sure to drop everything I didn't pick up in the Asylum that I happened to accidentally grab as I killed enemies and ran through the areas and whatnot before testing the damage I could do with the Pursuers, and it one-shot the demon. Honestly, that's not exactly shocking, it's the Taurus Demon, but it's good to know that doing less than 200 damage to a hollow wasn't an omen. The lower Burg is more annoying than hard, and when you know how to deal with the dogs, especially the first 3, it isn't that bad. Standing in the corner behind the fire will lure the dogs into it 99.9% of the time. From there, the thieves are no problem, and the other 2 dogs will usually approach separately. The Capra Demon is vastly easier when you don't have to worry about doing it hitless. Just running up the stairs is way easier. The fight does display the biggest problem with the Pursuers though, in that you can't use it in tight areas. Walls get rid of the projectiles immediately, and the damage is vastly reduced if all 5 don't hit. All 5 projectiles starting in different positions exacerbates the problem as well. Half the projectiles didn't even come close to the giant rat because of the ledge. Luckily, it still dies because it has so little health, but the point stands. One cast of Pursuers does about 1500 damage to the Gaping Dragon, which is around a third of its health, but because we're using the standard catalyst, our damage won't get much higher than this, no matter how high we get up our strength. This playthrough did make me want to do a proper spellsword build though. Since we're already doing boss cleanup, Gwendolyn is an obvious next target. It's a little sketchy to stand close enough to the wall that none of his projectiles hit you, but far away enough that none of the Pursuers get fizzled, but there is a safe position. The Pursuers will stagger him, giving you extra time to deal some more damage, nearly taking him out in one cycle. Using Power Within or RTSR, or even a +5 weapon, probably would have been enough damage to actually do one cycle, maybe even a better catalyst. Pursuers plus a jump attack only does about 1000 damage to the undead dragon, so I figured it might be more effective to just use the Pursuers on Priscilla. The Black Knight Sword is exactly the kind of weapon you should be using against her, since staggering her will remove her invisibility, and it only takes 2 swings to make her stagger. Unfortunately, Pursuers only does about 500 damage to Priscilla, but the sword can easily finish her off, so it's not exactly detrimental. I did kill the Anor Londo Firekeeper since she's angry at me for killing Gwendolyn, but we can't use her soul since we didn't find it at the Asylum. Seath kills us pretty quick, but the unavoidable crystal bursts don't actually do any curse buildup, and the laser itself doesn't either, so it's pretty easy to avoid being cursed during this death. Prison skip is also an option, I'm just bad at it. The Pasakas go down to 1 hit, so they aren't a threat, and we've already dealt with plenty of manserpents. Sprinting through the archives itself is only difficult if you haven't ever leveled your health once, and the crystal caves are nothing more than a slightly confusing hallway. 2 clams made it into Seath's arena this time, which made the fight about twice as hard as normal. All 5 Pursuers only do about 200 damage to Seath, which is nothing, but it's also Seath, so it's not like the fight is hard. And the sword does more than enough damage to make up for the spell's lackluster showing. I only had about 10,000 souls at this point, but instead of doing the normal thing and doing something else first, I was determined to fight Sif now. So I climbed the ladder near where the Hydra was and sprinted through the forest to reach Sif without using the crest. And then, after writing this, in post, now that I'm recording it, I realized I wouldn't have been able to use the crest anyway, since it's not from the Asylum. It's a much longer run than normal, but as long as you don't die, it's not like it's much of an inconvenience. Not dying might be a bit of a tall order if you haven't played the game dozens of times, but it's also Sif, so maybe not. A full cast of Pursuers does 775 damage to Sif, which isn't good, but it's a nice little bonus to get if you're not able to be attacking her at this exact moment. As a side note, someone said Sif is a boy in the comments of a previous video, but that's just not true. I mean, their gender isn't directly confirmed in the game, but Sif is a feminine name. It's the name of a Norse goddess, and the Dark Souls Sif shares traits with a D&D goddess. Plus, I don't see any balls, so I think it's fair to say Sif is almost definitely a girl. Anyway, the fight is pretty easy because it's Sif, and we can move on. Unfortunately, we can't use a bow and arrow because we didn't start as a hunter, but saving directly in front of the ghost ladder before a ghost can attack you gives you a pretty good chance of climbing up mostly intact. I was slightly worried about fighting the 4 kings with a +3 weapon, but my one and only death was due to pure greed rather than a lack of DPS. Don't attempt to cast Pursuers while a king is actively attempting to attack you. It won't end well, I promise. I didn't have a shield equipped, despite having the Crush Shield, because I didn't want to mid-roll, but healing after blocking magic with a sword works well enough. Just keep up the pressure, and the 4 kings should go down with just enough time to spare. Hopefully that truck didn't come through in the recording. The most useful thing Pursuers did in this entire run is take out the centipede worm thing that blocks the Demon Ruins bonfire. Killing that thing with melee is frustrating, but any ranged attacks can usually make short work of it. The Demon Fire Sage wasn't exactly made easier by using Pursuers, but it did take a good chunk of its health and made the fight shorter, whatever small mercy that may be. The Centipede Demon is a similar story. Neither fight is exactly hard with any build, but Pursuers makes them both a bit quicker. Any strategy you've ever applied to these two, such as attacking them while not getting hit, should work wonders. The only difference between a casual run and this run for the Bed of Chaos is not having a bow for the second. What are they? Chains? Nodes is the first word that comes to mind, but I don't know how accurate that word is. Anyway, the Bed of Chaos is fun and fair like usual. More fair than Manus at any rate, and I think it's more fun, at least. I'm allowed to make fun of Manus for this run. That fight took me an hour. I know that fight well now, okay? The Catacombs takes about 10 seconds to get through, like normal, especially once you realize that you should be rolling down onto the bottom floor rather than jumping, so you can start running as soon as possible and actually be able to react to the bone wheels. The skeletons from the top fell and ended up reviving when I got down there, but they didn't do much damage. Pursuers made the pinwheel fight feel awesome, but, I mean, it's pinwheel. I know realistically that this wasn't hard or whatever, but it looked cool to immediately obliterate them. I can't use a light source from the Tomb of the Giants because there isn't one in the Asylum, but I've also done this enough that it shouldn't matter. It takes about 30 seconds to get through the tomb, a minute and a half if you also include the area with the pinwheels, and Nito is officially the hardest lord. I used to think the 4 kings was a harder fight, but after all these challenge runs, the 3 skeletons that attack you unless you're wearing 2 specific rings make Nito way harder. I ended up kindling the bonfire using the 2 humanity from the Asylum, the one from the Stray and the one from the Asylum demon, since there's no other bonfire to kindle at this point. I didn't kindle Manus's since most attacks killed me in one hit anyway, and like I said, I wanted to learn the fight better, and kindling this one made more sense, but with no way to upgrade the healing. Anyway, once you're able to take out the skeletons, Nito isn't much of an issue. Of course, the skeletons don't stay dead, but Nito usually ends up killing them once he's close to you anyway, usually with his giant AoE. Just be careful not to aggro the big skeletons as usual. Kindling the bonfire did end up being useful this time, since I got toxicked and couldn't use any blooming purple moss. Pursuers usually targeted the skeletons instead of Nito, which was annoying, but I'm not really sure what I expected. Alright, just Gwyn left. I didn't end up equipping a shield even though I didn't use Pursuers, and I'm not really sure why I didn't decide to use either. But parrying with a bare fist isn't much harder than a shield once you're used to the timing, and it's just Gwyn, so... Alright, this was a really fun run to do, and I've been really excited to record this and get this out, but what with moving it was really difficult. But now I'm all set up. It's still a little echoey in here. I'm planning on getting up my sound dampening stuff and all that soon, so hopefully it won't be echoey soon. Thank you to The Crack, Manorock, Edgerald Durano, V, Emily, and Ryan Rickard for continuing to support the channel. I hope you all enjoyed. Jeez, I cannot talk right now. I hope you all enjoyed. I love you so much. Thank you for watching. If you're not subscribed and you want to be, if you enjoy my content, please subscribe. It helps a lot. I don't know how to end this.